Today we'll be looking at the smallest greenskins in the War and seeing what Gretchen can do for us on the table. Hello and welcome back to Auspex Tactics, the strategy focused 40k channel where we're all about getting the most out of our miniatures on the tabletop, even the smallest ones that cost us 3 points a model. Today we'll be looking at the role of Gretchen in the Ork Codex, with a look at their datasheet, any obvious rules, synergies, buffs and combos to get more out of these little guys on the table, and ways that I typically go about using Gretchen in a game of 40k. In the background, the Gretchin, or Grots as they're known to their Ork masters, are a small and cowardly subspecies of Ork who are some of the lowest members of the Ork society, and get given all the worst jobs, whether that's clearing minefields, scavenging for food and supplies, being used as living shields, or having to sit back and fire the big guns while their Ork masters get stuck into close combat in a proper scrap. If Gretchen are needed to fight in battle, they're encouraged in the general direction of the enemy by a Runtherd with his grabber stick and grot prod, though due to their very diminutive stature, they can only hope to bring down most opponents via the weight of numbers. So let's see what these little guys can do for us in battle then, with a look at their datasheet. So Gretchen are of course the second Ork troop choice, and they cost you 30 points for 10 models, and you can have mobs up to 30 of them if you should so wish. The Gretchen profile for 3 points a model certainly isn't impressive. They have movement of 5 inches, weapon skill of 5+, ballistic skill of 4+, strength and toughness of 2, 1 wound, 1 attack, leadership 4, and a 6+ save. Needless to say, with a strength and toughness of 2, they're not going to be winning any fights in close combat anytime soon, particularly when hitting on a 5+, and leadership 4 makes them unusually susceptible to morale if they don't have an Ork there to keep them in line. Even if one Gretchen gets shot in a mob, it means that you'd have a 50-50 chance of having some more of them run away. So if you want any sort of reliability of them staying around, you will need some sort of morale mitigation. They don't get access to the mob rule that most Ork units get, so they won't just be essentially fearless because you've got a large number of models in the unit. Each of the Gretchen is armed with a grot blaster, a 12-inch pistol weapon with a strength of 3, no AP and damage 1. Again, it's not really going to be winning any prizes for damage output, but in large numbers it could help whittle down light infantry. As we all know, Gretchen are surprisingly dangerous in large numbers, and this means that you add 1 to their hit rolls when you have 20 or more models in the unit. On top of that, they also have Daka, getting the usual extra shots if they roll a 6. Despite these benefits, they're still never really going to be particularly efficient damage dealers, but if you did somehow manage to get an entire mob of 30 in range, they would kill the best part of an Imperial Guard squad, averaging about 7 or 8 models, or down 1 Primaris Intercessor. Honestly though, I wouldn't get too focused on their damage output, it's not really why you bring them. I just see any damage output that they actually manage to do as a bonus to them doing their job, which is filling battalions, screening and holding objectives. I thought we'd also take a quick look at the Runtherd profile, seeing as you get one in every Gretchen box, and it can help keep the Grots in line. Runtherds are an elite choice for Codex Orks and they cost 35 points, so interestingly more than a standard squad of 10 Gretchen costs, as they cost 30 at 3 points a model. He has a movement of 5, weapon skill 3+, ballistic skill 5+, strength and toughness 4, 4 wounds, 3 attacks, leadership 7 and a 6+ save, so pretty much a standard Ork profile with a few additional wounds and attacks. At base he's armed with a grabber stick and slugger. You can choose to replace this grabber stick with a grot prod, and you can take either a grot lash or squig hound, both of which are free. The grabber stick and grot prod also cost the same, the grabber stick giving you +1 strength and 1 additional attack, and the grot prod giving you +2 strength and AP -1. Generally speaking, they're pretty similar against most targets, the grot prod being slightly better against anything with 3+ armor, where the grabber stick being better against anything with 5+ or worse. In all honesty, I wouldn't get too hung up about choosing one over the other, they're both pretty even, and the Runtherd's combat damage is fairly mediocre at the best of times. After the grot lash and squig hound though, I would absolutely certainly take the squig hound, as in my opinion this is the main reason that you take the model. Basically, the grot lash allows you to reroll hit rolls of 1 in the fight phase made by units of Gretchen infantry when they're within 3 inches of him. Now rerolling ones is okay, if it was in the shooting phase as well I'd be a lot more impressed, but seeing as it's only in the fight phase you're giving it a mediocre buff to some downright bad close combat attacks, even if you manage to somehow get a unit of 30 all in combat without losing any casualties. On average rolling you only kill about 2 guardsmen, and it only increases to about 2.5 if you have the Runtherd and this rule about. It's just so incredibly not worth it, and even if you did want the extra Gretchen close combat output for some reason, Better off just not getting a Runtherd and getting another 10 to 12 Gretchen anyway. They'll be a lot tougher, and they also give you their shooting too. So I'd leave the Grot Lash. The real reason that you take him is the Squig Hound, and this is the one to stop Gretchen running away. Basically, if a morale test is failed when they're within 3 inches of a Runtherd with a Squig Hound, instead of losing any casualties to morale in the normal way, they lose D3 Gretchen due to the Squig Hound, and they take no further casualties due to morale. This is great because Gretchen are cheap. Paying on average 2 of them to stop them from running away in big numbers is great. So basically he's a very cheap character who can keep the Gretchen in the game, and therefore you can kind of see him as a durability boost to Gretchen in the morale phase. This might come in every Gretchen box. At the points cost that they're at, you can't really afford to be taking Runthers for every 10 Gretchen models in your army. It just costs quite a lot of points for that. I'd be trying to take 1 or 2 and then keep multiple squads of Gretchen within 3 inches of them to help give that morale boost. Now there is quite an obvious alternative to the Runtherd, and that is the War Boss. Basically the War Boss has his Breaking Heads ability, which allows him to, in a very similar way, to deal out D3 mortal wounds to the Gretchen mob to allow them to stick around. They just have to be the same clan as the War Bosses. Now Runtherds cost 35 points and War Bosses cost 80 points, so obviously the Runtherd is far cheaper if you're just looking to babysit some backfield Gretchen. But if you are sending them up into the midfield, where the close combat profile of the character might actually come into effect, it might well be worth thinking about upgrading to a War Boss, as instead of having an Ork character with a really mediocre damage output, you get an incredibly dangerous fighty HQ that can threaten most targets. Plus it can also help with morale of other units, not just Gretchen, and helps to fill out your battalions too, which the Runtherd doesn't. So if it is convenient and you're running Gretchen of a specific clan, it's well worth considering taking a War Boss if you're thinking about a Runtherd, if there's any chance that he's going to be on the front line and getting into the thick of close combat. Overall, Gretchen are an incredibly cheap unit that can be pretty much immune to morale if you have one of these characters about. At a mere 30 points per model, they're ideal objective campers and screening units that you don't care about, that can be used to focus on getting objectives and winning the game, while your Orks focus on the important task of dealing damage to the enemy. They're bad damage dealers, but they're actually decently durable because you just need a lot of shots to be able to take down a full mob of Gretchen. In addition, they're great for filling out battalions, to get you all important command points for using fun tricks for the Orks on the table. So now let's take a look at some of the ways that we can get more out of Gretchen on the table. As Gretchen, they don't gain a clan trait and most stratagems can't be used on them, but they have gained that new specialist mob from the new Saga of the Beast book, and that one's the Grot Mobs one, and it's actually a considerable boost to these little greenskins. Grot Mobs allows them to reroll 1s both in shooting and the fight phase, and also it gets a 6+ invul save, which is pretty handy for keeping these guys around. Reroll 1s will make their blasters just that tiny little bit more dangerous. Again, you still shouldn't really be thinking about them as a damage dealing unit, but can help out in the situational uses when they might help. But that 6+ invul save is really what the Gretchen mobs love. Their whole point is to be an annoying screen that the enemy has to work to get through. Just by guaranteeing that 1 in 6 of them survive each attack means that the opponent has to do just that bit more work to chew through them. All other things being equal, it is a really good choice for Gretchen mobs, though this culture is perhaps more used on the killer cans and big guns than actually trying to fill mobs of Gretchen. One downside in a more balanced Ork list is that if you do use this culture, it will stop you using the Grot Shield stratagem on Ork units in the rest of your army. To use Grot Shields you have to use the same clan as another unit, so if that's a significant factor in your plan, then it might well be worth just keeping them in the same clan, rather than messing about with a specialist attachment. Realistically, a lot of the time I expect Gretchen to be fielded in 10 Grot units just to fill in battalions for other clans. It's often more important what the HQ and other troops choices might be in that clan, as opposed to actually trying to get the most out of the Gretchen, who are kind of just incidentally there to fill out the battalions and also be cheap screens. In terms of other clans though, one of the most useful for the Gretchen are the Snakebites, largely due to their warlord trait, which is called solely as a squigoth, and basically means that Gretchen auto-pass morale when they're within 12 inches of this boss. If you were playing Snakebites and you were going pretty heavily down the Gretchen route, then having guaranteed fearless grots without even taking those D3 casualties isn't all that bad, and 12 inches is a very big aura for this. Finally, I believe Makari Gazgul's Banner Waver can give Goth Gretchen a 6+ Feel No Pain type save, which again could be a handy little durability boost if you're playing Goths and you've got a few big units of Grots. In terms of other character support, They can of course gain access to all the usual Ork buffs as they are Ork clan infantry, meaning that they can benefit from the custom force field's 5+ invulnerable save, or the Pain Boy's Doc's tools for a 6+ feel no pain type save. Of course, if you do have Orks around, it might well be better to make the use of these on the boys first before the grots, as either of these models is going to have to save an absolute ton of Gretchen from death to make its points cost back compared with just taking more grots in the first place. Another slightly more interesting option is using the weird boys Dajomp to put them into the midfield. A big squad of 30 Gretchen just strung out in front of the opponent's battle line can make movement a real pain for them, and potentially chain back to secure some objectives for a turn or two as well. Again, you can only do this for one unit a turn, so it's often going to be better employed on boys, but depending on the exact list that you're playing, this could be very decent indeed. As we mentioned in terms of stratagems, Gretchen are locked out of being able to use almost all of them, but their Grot Shield stratagem is actually very good. This is the one where the poor Gretchen are used by as living shields by their Ork masters, and you use it straight after an Ork clan infantry unit has been hit by a ranged weapon. They need to have a Gretchen unit within 6 inches of them, and the Gretchen unit needs to be closer to the enemy than the attacking model. Each time an attack successfully wounds the unit they were shooting at, you roll a dice, and on a 2+, one of the Gretchen models in the unit is slain, and the attack sequence ends, doing no more damage to the target unit. This is really solid for protecting some of the more elite Ork units out there. Things like Looters are a prime example. They've got some reasonable damage output combined with stratagems, and if they're just sat at the back behind a large unit of Gretchen when they're targeted by enemy anti-infantry weapons, you can just pass off the majority of the wounds to their Grot Shields. Keep them nice and safe and their firepower intact. Typically, any wound that you can shrug off to a 3-point Gretchen is going to be worth it when you have any Ork boy with a 6+ save. They still have to wound the tougher profile of the Ork, and then you're almost guaranteed to fail that 6+ save, so having a Gretchen automatically die when the Gretchen is half the cost is a pretty reasonable trade. This stratagem really has a lot of potential depending on the list that you're playing. You could, for example, start a big unit of Storm Boys fairly far forward in your deployment zone and just put some Gretchen just in front of them. Then if your opponent wants to remove those Storm Boys, then they'll have to chew through an entire 30 model Gretchen squad before they can get to the actual boys that they want to shoot. Gretchen could be good for use against snipers, as this can be used against sniper weapons, say if you're having your linchpin warboss trying to be picked off by Space Marine eliminators, or a big mech with the souped up shocker from Vigilus for example. Grot Shields could be a great way to keep them safe. Could even potentially include Gretchen in transport vehicles. Say if you're taking a battle wagon with some knobs in it, you could include a unit of Gretchen as the rest of the passengers, and you could have them potentially be bullet sponges for once the knobs get out, or maybe just get out and score some objectives. For 1 command points, this really is pretty good, and is certainly one of our mainstay Ork stratagems. Other than that, the only one that I think you're likely to use on Gretchen is to auto-pass morale, which in the right circumstances, and you don't have any leadership buffs around, paying 2 CP to keep a whole load of grots on the board to be an annoying nuisance could well be worth it. You can use this one despite the stratagem restrictions from the Ork Codex. So how would I actually use Gretchen in-game then? First of all, I'd be looking to include them in the army first and foremost to fill out battalions, so if I had a number of HQ choices but not enough Ork mobs to fill up those battalions, then I'd be looking to take 10-man Gretchen units to give us all those extra lovely command points to do all of the powerful stratagems that Orks have access to. Even if you don't have any troop slots that need filling though, I'd strongly consider taking some grots along, just to use as cheap screens, objective campers, and to further dilute enemies' anti-infantry firepower. I certainly consider a couple of small units of 10-man grot squads to think about sitting on objectives at the back, or in the right circumstances just spreading out near your deployment zone and protecting the flanks from any deep striking or reserve threats coming in. Or in different sort of games, they could be placed towards the front of the Ork army line and protect all of the Orks from any deep strike threats coming in, or just advance up into the midfield and pile a whole ton of more annoying bodies onto objectives that the enemy doesn't really want to waste time shooting when you've got more boys piling forwards. For most of these 10 grot squads, I wouldn't generally consider bothering with morale mitigation. I'd rather just take more of them and more grots in the squad. I think it's absolutely fine and can be really quite powerful to take large units of Gretchen though. 30 strong grot mobs can be great from anything from securing objectives to being really powerful barriers to your Ork units via grot shields, soaking large amounts of overwatch, and all sorts of other useful things. If you do take them in these numbers, then I definitely would consider morale mitigation things, either a cheap Runtherd with a squig hound to keep them in line, or think about even taking an additional war boss who can march forwards with them, keep them all fearless, and also get stuck into combat in his own right to give your little Gretchen formation some actual melee teeth. I absolutely do think that Orc armies can actually work with huge amounts of Gretchen on the board. If you dedicated a battalion to your Gretchen screens, then you could potentially have up to 180 bodies for a mere 540 points. You could run them in that Grot Mobs battalion with a Pain Boy. Then you've got 180 bodies with a 6+ invul save and a 6+ feel no pain type save, who are all pseudo fearless when you've got them next to Runtherds or war bosses. They're not going to do a whole load in terms of damage outputs, but they're a really huge obstacle for the opponent to remove. It's still going to take armies with a ton of dedicated anti-infantry firepower quite a while to chew through that lot. Then the rest of the army can be dedicated to damage dealing units, whether that's tons of mech guns, some deep striking Orc boys or storm boys, shock attack guns, or shock attack guns or looters or things. It's hard not to be intimidated when you're facing that many models on the other side of the tabletop, no matter what they are. In terms of actually using them in game, in terms of cheap grot squads, I want to deploy them either on objectives or on the outer extremities of the army, and they can really be reactive to what sort of opponent you're fighting. If you're fighting a mainly gunline list, they could just pile forwards towards them, trying to draw some extra fire and tying up any shooting units that they could. If you're fighting an army with lots of deep strike threats, then you could keep any of those deep strike threats a long way from your Orc main battle line, just by starting them on the edge of the deployment zone as an expendable screen and forcing them to fight that first. And otherwise they could literally just sit on objectives or make for any objectives in the midfield, and any fire that they draw from the enemy is a positive, and if they don't get shot then they'll help win you the game. If you're using grot shields, I'd typically be wanting to use this on a larger unit of Gretchen, something like 20 to 30, and if you really want to protect one target, then you're going to need to wrap them somewhat all around that unit, meaning that the enemy can't flank them, and bypass your grot shields by getting around the sides. If you can get them in a custom force field range, they can help force your opponent to actually still shoot the unit with the grot shield stratagem active, even though they're a lot tougher than the grots, rather than just directly targeting the grots in themselves. As the game goes on, I'd think about the use of each Gretchen unit wisely. They're certainly expendable, and if all of your Gretchen wind up dying for the cause to deliver you victory, then it's all fine, but I wouldn't go deliberately sacrificing them and getting them all killed just for the sake of it, as charging in two superior threats could well mean that they just die a lot faster than if they just stayed put for a turn and forced your opponent to deal with them in their turn rather than getting them killed in yours. Overall, I'd treat them as a resource. You can basically, as the game goes on, decide, would I pay this amount of grot bodies to achieve that particular thing or objective, and make a decision as to whether or not you think it's worth it. Overall, I think that Gretchen are a highly competitive unit for the Orc army list, and a lot of other factions would absolutely kill to have a unit like them, as throwaway expendable units are incredibly handy to have in the battle line, and some entire factions just don't have any access to this sort of thing. If you've got any other ideas for using Gretchen to their maximal effect in games of 40k, please let me know down in the comments below. It's always good to hear new opinions, and also let me know if they've actually managed to kill anything big, as sometimes those grot blasters can really surprise you. I remember once I managed to get my war boss killed by charging a big unit of Gretchen. He killed a few, some fled, and then the large number of attacks managed to drag him down, particularly with their pistols in the next phase. It doesn't happen often, but sometimes you can really underestimate them. If you've enjoyed this video, feel free to subscribe to Auspex Tactics for more Orc content. We'll have plenty more Orc videos coming over the next few weeks. If you've been enjoying the videos, please feel free to check out my Patreon link in the description below. Making all of these videos does take quite a lot of time, and it's only possible due to the channel's Patreon supporters. So if you are enjoying the videos regularly, then any support is greatly appreciated, and a big thank you to my current Patreons for making this channel possible. In any case, a big thank you for listening, and I'll hope to see you guys next time.